This is gonna be a fun episode for me because not only is this the hardest and heaviest piece of wood that I've used for any map piece across any of the maps that I've done so far. Nothing else even comes close. But it's also one of my absolute favorite trees. It's the tree that got me curious about trees in the first place, which is what led me into woodworking and then making content like this. So let's not forget that it's a gorgeous piece of wood and it's gonna look so cool up on the board. I can't wait. Let's get into it.
Up next, it's the great state of Nevada, which I'm making out of a piece of curl leaf mountain mahogany, Cercocarpus ledifolius. Mountain mahoganies are a small genus of at least 9 species of trees and shrubs in the rose family that are all native to the western US and northern Mexico, with the curl leaf mountain mahogany being the largest and most widely distributed of them all. Now, despite their name, mountain mahoganies aren't true mahogany trees at all, and any tree that produces wood you'd know as mahogany wood are from the tropical genus Swietenia. But it is the wood of the mountain mahogany that gives the tree its misleading name, since it's a rich-hued reddish-brown mahogany-like color. Other than that, though, the tree and the wood are nothing like that of the true mahogany. They're their own special desert thing. You're most likely to find the curl-leaf mountain mahogany in the Great Basin and western interior, where they thrive in harsh, dry, high-altitude locations. They prefer sandy, well-drained soils in areas that receive little annual rainfall and often dominate steep, exposed mountain slopes. It's an extremely slow-growing tree, sometimes taking more than 100 years to reach full height. The oldest documented specimens are around 1,300 years old, and with it being such a remote and understudied species, it's widely believed that much older specimens are out there somewhere. Either way, the mountain mahogany is one of the longest-lived flowering plants in the world. The curl-leaf mountain mahogany is distinguishable by its leathery dark green leaves, which often curl at the edges, giving the tree its name. And those leaves stick around all year, making this a broadleaf evergreen tree. Like other mountain mahoganies, it's also recognizable by the characteristic fuzzy white seeds that adorn the tree in the summertime, which often fall and create thick, crunchy blankets of snowy seeds that are just real satisfying to walk across. It's a tree with a wide variety of traditional medicinal uses among the native tribes that live within its range. The northern Paiute note that the bark is good for treating tuberculosis, boiling and administering the red tea to combat it and other pulmonary disorders. The inner bark and roots of the tree can also be used to make a red dye, but otherwise it's the wood of the mountain mahogany that makes this tree particularly unique. It's easily one of the hardest and densest species of wood native to America. On the Janka hardness scale, which is used to compare the hardnesses of wood by measuring the pounds of force required to embed a small steel ball halfway into that piece of wood, the mountain mahogany clocks in with a rating of 3,200 pounds of force, which is right up there with desert ironwood's 3,200 pounds, and far ahead of other famously hard North American woods like Osage orange, mesquite, hickory, sugar maple, and others. It's so dense, in fact, that it sinks in water. As such, the wood's traditional indigenous uses include making wooden dice for games, tools and clubs, bows, while today the wood has little modern use as it's found in such remote locations and it's real tough on saws and tools, so it's primarily used by hobbyists in things like wood turning and carving.
All right, so I've got our scrap wood pieces from Nevada. Got another piece of mountain mahogany scrap here. One of the most common questions I get asked, if not the single most common question I get asked whenever I post a video online, is what do I do with the pieces of scrap wood? It's kind of a tough question to answer because the straightforward answer is I toss them in a scrap bin and then they become scrap wood, and I use them for all sorts of things. Sometimes they go into the fire, sometimes they get used for other projects. Sal, what do you want? This has been the hardest intro I think I've ever had to record. And this is one of those kind of projects. This is one of the very first things I tried to teach myself how to do was make beads. These are beads that I made myself from mountain mahogany wood. Being such a dense, hard wood, it almost feels like stone. It's kind of perfect for beads. The first time I ever tried to make beads, I basically took a twig, used a handsaw to saw them into small chunks. So I had these little plugs, basically drilled a small hole in the middle, cut the end of an Allen wrench off, stuck that in the hole, chucked that Allen wrench on the end of a Dremel, and then just hand shaped it on a piece of sandpaper. So you can actually make beads using nothing more than a handsaw, a hand drill, and a Dremel. I don't recommend it. They didn't look great. It was very, very time consuming, but it's possible. This process here works quite a bit better. So we're gonna take these pieces of scrap wood. It's a really fun little project and kind of a perfect use for mountain mahogany wood. Another thing mountain mahogany really works well for is figure carving, but I was too impatient to try to do a whole figure carving for you all. So let's get to it. We're gonna start at the bandsaw by cutting off a bunch of slices that we can then take over to the bead cutting bit. I've personally found that it works best by cutting down into the end grain. So we're gonna be cutting slices this way. We don't want to be drilling the bead down into the face of the grain. I've just found that with certain species of wood in particular, the bead will split or break apart. So it's just as simple as cutting a bunch of slices of end grain. This is the bead cutting bit right here. We need it to be thick enough that it can drill halfway down, flip it over, and then drill the other way. So it's better to err on the side of it being a little too thick rather than too thin. If you're using salvaged wood like I like to, you'll definitely want to make sure that there's not cracks running all the way through them, like with this one. But for the most part, most of these look okay, so let's get to drilling. First things first, here's a look at the bead cutter bits that I use. I really like these ones. I found them on the internet. I just searched bead cutter bits and was able to buy some online. These have worked really well. What I especially like is they come with these easily swappable sizes. I mean, look at the size of this one compared to this. So, I can just loosen this with an Allen wrench, pull this little thing out, and then swap this in, and suddenly we're cutting a big old chonker of a bead. I use one of the smallest bits just because I like those smaller beads, but it's pretty simple. Bad news, as you just saw, is that the drill press fell apart after making like 3 or 4 beads. The good news is I had a bunch of leftovers from the last time I made some beads. So we've got a bunch of size options to choose from and just a lot of fun colors. So, oh boy. As you may have seen when I was cutting those first ones out, oftentimes you're left with like a little ring around there. And even if there's not much of a ring on there, they still feel just, a little rough and tumble. So we want to polish these up, especially something like mountain mahogany, where it's a wood that is so dense, you can sand it up to an extremely high grit and get like a really nice, shiny, polished finish on there that's going to feel really smooth and just gonna feel really nice. So the method I've found that's worked really well is to take a rotary tool, and I have just like a little carbide burr bit on there that you use for power carving. It works really well for just shoving into the hole on the bead, kind of press down nice and firmly, and it'll usually keep the bead in place on here while let's turn this on. When I rotate, see what's hanging on there? And that way you can take a piece of sandpaper, like so, now I'll flip it over. That'll allow us to get the other side. And then I just grab a new piece of sandpaper at a higher grit. Got our micro mesh pads now, and these go all the way up to 12,000 grit, which will allow us to get a really nice polish on a wood as dense as mountain mahogany. So. Last but not least, we do an oil and wax finish on this, and then we're done. Now the wax. I enjoy that part.
And there we have it. Not too complicated. Here's how those beads turned out. And here's a closer look at a bracelet of mountain mahogany beads that I made a few years ago. There's something I really enjoy about having a piece of jewelry made from the wood of a tree that's personally significant to me. Again, this is the tree that sparked my curiosity about trees in the first place. So it's just nice to have that reminder on my wrist with me at all times. So if you have the means to make wooden beads, I definitely recommend it. The other thing that mountain mahogany's exceptionally dense wood is good for is as a firewood. It burns long and exceptionally hot, and was the preferred charcoal wood used for smelting ores in the 19th century. It also has a distinctly flavorful smoke to it, and it's prized as a unique option for smoking meats where the tree is found. That's something I have yet to try, but I'm definitely curious about it. But yeah, this is just an absolute favorite tree and type of wood for me. It's difficult to work with, but oh, so rewarding. I mean, just look at this final piece. Look at some of that classic rich golden red in there. This piece came from a dead standing tree that had been injured some time ago, so we've got some nice dark brown streaks and some bits of rot, and even a strip of its pale pink sapwood. I've been so eager to get a mountain mahogany state on any of my maps, and it just fits so perfectly with the shape of Nevada. So if you don't mind me, I'm just gonna go stare at this piece all day now. And on that note, make sure to like, subscribe, and sound off in the comments to let me know which state and or tree you'd like to see up on this map next.